Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start just where my friend from New York left off. I was encouraged to hear my good friend from New York embrace the idea of a bipartisan commission. We have that bill in our package of reforms, and I would invite the gentleman, my good friend, to look at that, to co-sponsor. I'd love to work with you on a bipartisan commission reform. Also, the gentleman expresses concern about our one big beautiful bill, which reduces the funding formula for the Bureau. And I would encourage the gentleman and all my friends on the other side of the aisle to look at co-sponsoring my legislation that would allow them and us to reclaim the power of the purse over the agency. The TABS Act, the Taking Account of Bureaucrats Spending Act, which would restore Congress's bipartisan and meaningful oversight over the Bureau so that we would control the appropriations. So I think the gentleman's line of questioning is timely because it gives us an opportunity in the Congress on a bipartisan basis to reclaim our oversight functions over the Bureau. Ms. Johnson, let's talk about CFPB reform. Would you explain how my legislation, the Taking Account of Bureaucrats Spending Act, which would subject the Bureau to congressional appropriations, would enhance accountability and limit bureaucratic overreach?
I think that for far too long, the CFPB has not been accountable. We haven't had a commission. We haven't had consensus or dissenting views welcomed at the Bureau. It's been by one director, and oftentimes they've got kind of ruling by fiat. So Congress hasn't had the authority and the visibility into the Bureau. I think that they will be more responsive if there is an ability for you all to control the purse strings.
And I appreciate your testimony endorsing my legislation to put some guardrails and definition around the abusiveness prong of UDAP. Why is that important?
Look, Congress did create an exceptional standard for UDAP with the CFPB, unlike FTC, unlike some of the other prudential regulators. And for far too long, it has been undefined, and entities that are regulated by the CFPB don't have the clarity needed to understand what constitutes as an abusive act or practice, what constitutes, and how that differs from, say, deceptive or unfair acts and practices. And then, in addition to that, the CFPB has at times gone far beyond and really interpreted UDAP into things that it never was intended for. Oftentimes, it actually decides one day that something is illegal or that it's a UDAP violation when it was perfectly legal and acceptable and actually done by the entire industry the day before. Then it applies retroactively penalties to different institutions.
Yeah,
it's just wrong.
Yeah, and it's wrong. It denies Americans due process, and it's why the Bureau has such a black eye. It can be reformed into a much more professional agency, and that's also why we need to stop these roving fishing expeditions, these civil investigative demands with no statutory violation or regulatory violation even alleged, just a fishing expedition with no due process. We need to reform that process as well. Mr. Benson, as you pointed out, Dodd-Frank ushered in over 400 new regulations and granted regulators like the SEC broad discretionary authority. Nearly 15 years later, many of these powers remain unused, yet their mere existence creates regulatory uncertainty. For example, Section 921A allows the SEC to ban mandatory arbitration clauses in securities contracts without any additional action from Congress. Congress has already weighed in on this issue. In 2017, we overturned the Bureau's mandatory arbitration rule, not just on procedural grounds, but because the evidence showed arbitration delivers better outcomes for consumers than costly, drawn-out class action lawsuits. That was a clear bipartisan message. Regulators should not restrict arbitration based on ideological or political agendas. And that's why I introduced the Business Owners Protection Act to repeal these unused powers to provide legal clarity and enhance transparency and accountability at the SEC. Mr. Benson, how do these dormant but broad discretionary powers contribute to uncertainty and risk in the capital markets?
Well, certainly with respect to things like pre-dispute arbitration agreements, which is the mainstay in the securities world, and to your point, is very investor-friendly, very cost-efficient, and much more cost-efficient than court litigation. It is a little bit like a sword of Damocles hanging over you. So we would agree with you that we're not sure why Congress felt the need to give the SEC the authority in this instance, and if so we would agree with repealing that.
Well, there's a lot of dormant, unused authorities. If it's been 15 years and the SEC or other regulators empowered by Dodd-Frank have not acted, and Congress has send a message to the contrary. We need to repeal those unused and dormant authorities. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynn.